Mr. Ferencz, thank you so much for having us. My name is Marguerite. I'm with Misericordia University, and I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the entire university. I came along with my colleagues Amanda Caleb from the English department and Tom Hajkowski from our history department. What we're hoping to do today is to talk to you a little bit about your experience, your life experience, which has been vast. And given that it's the 70th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials, we wanted to introduce you to our students and to talk to you a little bit about your role in something that was so historic. And I think that this is what's keeping you going decade after decade after decade, is that you're so busy talking about this historic event that we're so privileged to be able to share this with you. And we wanted to thank you on behalf of the entire university for talking to us. And I guess I'm the one that's starting here, so I'd like to be able to just ask you about how does a 25-year-old law student, or you might have been even a little bit younger, just coming out of law school, get involved in something that has been so important historically as the Nuremberg trials? How did we get there?
Well, Marguerite, it's been a long journey. I am now in my 96th year. I should perhaps begin, although I hope it won't take me 96 years to get to the end of the story, by explaining that I was born in a little village, which you can hardly find on any map, in what was Romania at one time when I was born. When my sister was born in the same bed a year and a half earlier, she's Hungarian. So I learned at a very early age, it's not so much what they call the terrain, but how they treat their inhabitants that's important. And since we were victims of persecution as well as poverty, I decided that it was time for my family to move on to another country. I was then 9 months old, but I found myself on a little boat crossing the Atlantic Ocean in November and December in 1920. And we arrived. My parents could not speak a word of English. My father, who'd been apprenticed as a shoemaker, figured that since he could make a pair of boots out of a cow's hide, he'd surely find a living wherever he went. No one told him there were no cows running around New York. The result was, we arrived in America with no money, no trade, no friends, no place to live. We were picked up by a Jewish charity for a night, and he was then lucky to get a job as a janitor, taking care of a few houses in an area which was the most dense crime area, I learned later, in the United States, known as Hell's Kitchen. And he was the janitor there, and that's where my memory begins. I managed to get admitted to the City College, which was free. I applied to the Harvard Law School. They gave me a scholarship for my exam on criminal law. I didn't have any money, and I got hungry from time to time. And right across from the law school is the divinity school. And they had a big cafeteria. So I went over to the divinity school and I met whoever was in charge of the cafeteria, and I said, look, I'm a student at the law school. I have no money. I'm hungry. As a thing, I'll work for food. And they said, no problem. You come over at about 2 o'clock or so. We'll finish with lunch. You'll help clean up the dishes and so on. Whatever's left, you can eat. Well, that was great. Another way I kept alive was by doing work for a professor. There was Professor Sheldon Gluck, his name was. Gluck in German means luck. Well, it was lucky for him. I did all the research for a book on war crimes. That meant I had to read everything in the Harvard Law Library, which was an excellent library, that had ever been written in French or in English on war crimes. A few months ago, the dean of the Harvard Law School, Martha Minow, honored me exceptionally by giving me a gold medal, their highest award from the Harvard Law School. The previous recipient had been Nelson Mandela. And I get all kinds of awards, but that was particularly touching for me because I was a great admirer of Nelson Mandela and everything that he stood for. Anyway, I was still in school when the war broke out. The United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor. Everybody I knew went down to enlist somewhere. I tried the same, but I wanted to go into military intelligence. I had learned French in school, and I thought if they dropped me behind the lines in France, I would raise such havoc with the German occupiers that they wish they were back in Berlin. But I was disqualified as a security risk. The FBI, to whom I had applied for that, informed me they're very sorry, but they won't accept anybody unless you've been a citizen for at least 15 years. And my parents had only applied for citizenship later when they could read a little bit, and I'd only had 13 years, so I was out of that. I wanted to get into the Air Force. I couldn't reach the pedals. They told me that wouldn't do. So by the time I managed to get accepted in the Army as a private, the lowest rank there was, they recognized that talent immediately, so I was a private in the artillery as a typist. I couldn't type either. So in all their infinite wisdom, nevertheless, I somehow managed to land on the beaches of Normandy, Omaha Beach, Saint-Mère-Église, for which the French honored me a few weeks ago, on July 3rd, 2015, by giving me a beautiful medal pinned on my chest by the Minister of Defense, as I became a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, a member of the French Legion of Honor. When I was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army about 3 years later, they gave me 5 battle stars, and I said, "What's that for?" I was no hero. I was hiding under a truck most of the time. And they said, "Well, you didn't get killed or wounded, and you were in every major battle, from Normandy Beach, across the Rhine in a pontoon bridge and jeep. You were in the Battle of the Bulge, the final battle of the war." As we were getting toward the end of the war, some of the things I had learned in law school began to be put to use. I was a corporal then in General Patton's army, and I was sent to Patton's headquarters, and there I met a colonel, and he said, "We have been directed by the president to set up war crimes trials, and your name has been forwarded from Washington. What's a war crime?" They had no idea about war crimes, crimes against humanity, aggression, things they knew, absent without leave, conduct unbecoming an officer, but the things they had to deal with to hold war criminals accountable, they never heard of. I was the first man in the United States Army to deal with war crimes. And to give you a quick survey of what that was like, we'd receive reports coming into Patton's headquarters that Allied flyers had been shot down over terrain occupied by Germany or in Germany itself. And the flyers were almost invariably beaten to death by the people on the ground. And my job was to get out there fast, find the bodies, identify them, find out who did the job, place them under arrest if I could catch them, which mostly was not the case because they fled, and hold them for possible trial. These were known as the flyer cases. Now, you ask, how come the civilians came out and beat him to death? The civilians were mostly women. The soldiers were out in the field. And when I arrested one, which was typical, she said, "The bombers were here last week. They bombed my house. I lost my 2 babies were killed." And so when we got these flyers on the ground, she said, "I went after them." And my mother said, "Don't do that, you know. A German girl shouldn't do that." She didn't actually kill them with her boot or her shoe, or whatever it was she beat them with. But it was an illustration, for me at least. I understood her anger as a human being, as a mother, to find these guys that she thinks were responsible for killing her babies. Did she want to take revenge on them somehow, to do something? One of the earliest problems of war, recognizing that those who commit the crimes don't think they're committing crimes. On the contrary, they think the other guy is the criminal. Very important, very important point. Make sure that you determine who is really the wrongdoer. And if there is no court to determine that, and each party decides for himself, you're all doomed, because every party will decide that they are doing the noble thing, and the other party is threatening them and jeopardizing what they value more than life itself. And they will kill you if they can, or you'll have to kill them. And that's a terrible system. So I was inaugurated to that. I was then 24 years old. And I met some of the criminals. It was digging up the bodies was no fun. Dig up bodies with my hands because you can't use a pick. It was cold winter. If you hit them with a pick, you don't know if it's a bullet hole or a bayonet. You have to get the body out slowly. I don't want to go into any more horror than necessary. There's enough horror for everybody. Well, I had prepared for dossiers on the flyer cases and for holding the people for trial by the Army. I witnessed some of those trials which started right after the war. We would bring into a room the guards in concentration camps. My job was to get into the camps as soon as they were reached by the tank battalions and seize the evidence of the crimes, which meant that I'd get there, and of course I couldn't operate as a corporal. And the colonel who was in charge was a decent enough fellow. He one day called me and he said, "Corporal, you know, you've been making all these nice reports," and he got promoted on the basis of my reports. And he said, "I'm going to make you a sergeant." And he handed me the sergeant's stripes. And I said, "Sir, I'm very sorry. I cannot operate as a sergeant either. I want to be turned loose. I cannot wear any insignia to do my job. And so just turn me loose. I don't want to stay any more time in the office, you know, writing these reports." And he agreed. Whenever we had an assignment, off I went to the camp. Camp was being liberated, tank commander, everything is chaos. The Nazis were running out of the camp. The inmates were lying on the floor, dead and dying. Soldiers were chasing them, and it was, you know, total chaos and disease, lice and rats and dysentery and cholera. And I'd go to whoever's the commanding officer just liberated the camp. I would just say, "Sir, I'm here on orders from General Patton. I need 10 men immediately to surround the Schreibstube, the office. Nobody goes in and nobody goes out without my consent." In order to save myself from being shot for impersonating an officer, I had typed out a very nice form saying, "To whom it may concern, so-and-so crossed out Benjamin Ferencz is authorized to, he's a war crimes investigator, he's authorized to go anywhere, interrogate anybody, do anything he damn well pleases," you know, and I'm on command of General Patton. And I had stamped secret on that particular document because I didn't want it to be floating around too much. Word might get back to headquarters somewhere. But what is interesting there too, if you go, and I hope you will go, visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington, our nation's capital. I've donated all of my archives of that period to them. Some of them are national treasures because they're unique. And when I visited one of those visits, I saw this familiar looking paper on the wall, and I looked at it, and there it was on display, you know, how the war crimes were investigated. But what was most amusing to me was because I had put the secret stamp on, they had to get it declassified. Declassified by so-and-so and so-and-so. So, the moral of the story is not to go around forging documents, but there may be circumstances when the interest of justice and the interest of life and death, you have to do some things which are a bit out of the box. The Army did conduct military commission trials in the Dachau concentration camp based upon my reports on entering Buchenwald, Mauthausen, Flossenburg, Ebensee, a whole host of camps. And the trials were just like this. "Herr Schickelgruber, stand up. You're being accused of being a guard in a concentration camp, thousands of people being murdered there every day. What have you got to say for yourself?" "Oh, I was, visiting my grandmother. I never heard anything about that." And then the standard, everybody said, "I was only obeying orders. What else could I do? We have to obey orders, you know." And so each defendant got about 2 minutes. The captain on one side, the lieutenant on the other, the 3 officers. The highest one was the prison judge. None of them had any legal education as far as I could see. Go out, come back 5 minutes later. Court has decided all of you are guilty and sentenced to death. Sometime thereafter, I visited Landsberg prison where these executions were to take place. And I spoke to the man in charge. This was after the war. I said, how many people were shot here? How many were executed here? He said about 1,000. The war was over. I went home. I was with 10 million other soldiers looking for a job. I had finished law school. I had passed the bar while I was in the Army, but I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. I was looking for a job, and a few weeks later I had a telegram from Washington. They begged me to go back into the Army. I said, under no circumstances will I go back into the Army. They said, well, we'll give you a simulated rank of a full colonel, but you won't be in the Army. You can quit anytime you want. The lady to whom I've been happily married now for 70 years, I called her up and I said, how would you like to go to Europe for a brief honeymoon? The Army had wanted me to do the military trials, but I was hijacked by another fellow by the name of Telford Taylor. He was then a colonel in the Army, and he was looking for somebody to set up additional American trials to follow on the International Military Tribunal trial which took place in Nuremberg. The International Military Tribunal was composed of representatives of the occupying powers of France, England, and the United States, and the Soviet Union. And they had agreed that the major criminals would be put on trial somewhere and held to account for their aggressions and for their crimes against humanity had been committed in an enormous scale. Those trials were already started, and Telford Taylor, who was a Harvard lawyer and had been active in the government before, in government service, he was recruiting, and he got a hold of me, and he said, I'd like you to come back with me. I was going to set this thing up. Later, we were good friends. We were law partners in New York. We had many experiences together, which I can't recount because of lack of time, but we parachuted out of a burning plane over the ruins of Berlin. And anyway, I went back with him. And he assigned me, he said, look, you know all about investigations and all that. We have potential enemies, people of high repute like Hitler and Goering and Goebbels and Himmler, well known in the press. But we need evidence against them. If you have the defendant or the potential defendant and no evidence, you've got nothing. If you have the evidence but no criminals, you've got nothing. So we had to match them. And that was my job. So I took a staff of about 50 people, went to Berlin, set up a headquarters, and began going through all the files of the different German embassies, the SS, the Foreign Office, etc., searching for evidence. Most of the researchers were former German refugees, all Americans by now, or other nationalities, allied nationalities. And one of my researchers comes and he shows me something he found. He said, look at this. And these were reports, but they're reports from the Eastern Front. And they chronicled there the activities of 4 different groups of men. They were all the same, but A, B, C, and D, called ASATs, which nobody can pronounce or translate. But these were special action squads, and their assignment was to follow behind the German lines and kill, without pity or remorse, every single Jewish man, woman, or child they could lay their hands on. Do the same for the gypsies. Do the same for anybody else who might be a threat to Germany. And that's what they did. And every day they reported to headquarters which Einsatzgruppe A, Einsatzkommando 10 entered the town to give you an actual case of Minsk. And within the first 24 hours, we succeeded in eliminating, they never said murdering, eliminating 33,771 Jews on 29-30 November 1941. That was the Jewish high holidays. That's in their report. And I got the name of the commander, and I got the name of his assistant commander, and I got him. I took a bunch of these things down to Telford Taylor, flew down from Berlin to Nuremberg. I said, we got to put on another trial. He said, we can't. We've got everything's been assigned. The lawyers are all assigned. The trials are already beginning, these subsequent proceedings, as they were called. I said, look, we can't let these guys go. I have here in my hand mass murder, black and white. And I know the defendants, and we can catch them and all that. He said, can you do it in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. He said, okay, so you do it. So I became the chief prosecutor of what was certainly the biggest murder trial in human history. I had never tried a case before. I don't think I'd ever seen a complaint before. I selected 22 defendants because there were 22 seats in the dock. Ridiculous reason, but nevertheless, that's the truth. I picked them on the basis of their rank. I think I had 6 or 9 SS generals, and of their education. Most of them had PhDs, and I accused them of murdering in cold blood over 1 million people, including hundreds of thousands of children. I arrested my case in 2 days. I convicted all of them. 13 of them were sentenced to death. That's a record which nobody in the world will ever meet again, I hope. I was 27 years old. That was my first case. So this is a noteworthy point of history. A poor Jewish refugee boy, born and lived in poverty, becomes the chief prosecutor of the biggest murder trial in human history, and that still stands as a great record. Now, okay, where do we go from there? When the Nuremberg subsequent proceedings against doctors, for example, who perform medical experiments on concentration camp victims, against the lawyers and judges who use the law to get rid of their enemies for political purposes. This was in the film, if you've seen it, Judgment at Nuremberg. Spencer Tracy, Marlene Dietrich, and some big stars. And against us generals, and also the industrialists who worked people to death. The policy was, don't just kill them because you're wasting manpower. If they're strong and able to work them to death. You get much more out of them. So they set up the system of selection. There'd be a doctor like Mengele, his name was. People would be unloaded from the ghettos, from the cattle cars, which transported them to special extermination centers, and the doctor would take a look at them and say, all right, this one, show me your hands. Oh, this is not a worker. Out. Go to the right, that's directly to the gas chamber, which is a room. It looked like a bathroom set up with showers in the ceiling, except they had water coming out. Came out poison gas, Cyclone B, manufactured by IG Farben, the makers of Bayer aspirin. So that came down and killed them. And then they were pushed at the end. There was a chute going to an oven down below, crematorium, and they burned them. And the fat they saved to make soap out of it, and the ashes they threw out into the field for fertilizer. The hair was cut off before they were gassed and used for mattress stuffing. The gold teeth, if they had any, were ripped out of their mouth. But one conclusion certainly stayed with me forever. War is hell. And if you can allow this sort of thing to happen, something wrong with the human animal. So when that phase of my pursuit of criminals came to an end, I was approached by a number of organizations, Jewish organizations, charities, and asked if I would stay on in Germany and set up programs to recover the property which had been stolen from the people they had murdered. And my wife, who had joined me a few months later after I'd left home, military government law allowed the restitution of property which had been seized. And I set up that program. It became negotiating with the German government for a treaty to provide compensation to the state of Israel, for one thing, for having given refuge to the displaced persons who were in the camps with nothing except a tattoo on their arm. And if they hadn't been helped by Israel, there was no place to go. So we felt that since Israel had incurred the cost, a new country, no precedence for this kind of individual compensation program. The country was not in existence when the crimes occurred. The country we were asked to pay was not in existence. The East German government was part of it. It was a new German state. Technically, legally, very complex. But it was guided by the moral push from the German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, who was a devout Catholic, who recognized, as he put it specifically in an opening speech on this subject, horrible crimes have been committed in the name of the German people, which imposes an obligation to try to make amends. And with that kind of a push, we were able to negotiate complicated compensation laws. When I was a chief prosecutor of the biggest murder trial, I asked myself, what do I ask for? These are all mass murderers. No doubt about it. I had their daily reports. They were going to tell me they went to their grandmother's funeral. They tried that. And I sent investigators out, came back, and they knew they didn't never had a grandmother. So what do I ask for? Where is justice? There were 3,000 men who did it every day. Mass murder, no doubt. There was boasting there. Some said, well, I never wasted ammunition. I took the infants and smashed their head against a tree. Another one said, no, I had a different technique. I had the mother hold her infant to her breast, and then I could fire at the infant. That would go through the infant, kill the infant, and also kill the mother. And she's quiet during that time, so we save ammunition and so on. They had all these nice excuses of how they went mass murder. What do you ask for? And I said, if we're going to do anything good with this trial, we have to create a precedent. And a precedent which will save people's lives and not kill them. And so I asked the court to affirm by international criminal law the right of all human beings to live in peace and dignity regardless of their race or creed, because these people had been murdered under horrible circumstances because they didn't share the race or the ideology or the religion of their executioners. And I thought it was horrible when I was 27. I still think it's horrible when I'm 96. I've been trying to change that because I think it's horrible, it's unjust, and I hope that my trial, which was affirmed by a Catholic presiding judge, Michael Vesmano of Pittsburgh, who went into a seclusion in a monastery with his priest for a week, and he came back and he began the sentencing. Ohlendorf, stand up. Ohlendorf would come into this courtroom, see it in Germany. There's a little elevator, and it goes out to the basement where the prisoners were kept. Step out into the courtroom, put the earphones on, look at the judge this far away, and the judge says, for the crimes of which you have been convicted, this tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. The defendant nods, takes the earphones off, steps back, the door's shut, drop him down into hell. So this is some of my experience of war crimes trials, setting up the laws to help the victims with their claims, to recover property which have been stolen from them under duress. I also went after the German companies to get compensation for their slave laborers. Terrible battles, always saying the same, oh, we never did it. Oh, not us, and not our company. IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens, AEG, all the big German names. No, not us. Lies, absolute lies, and I could prove it. I had all the documents. I wrote a book on that called Less Than Slaves, published by Harvard University Press. Incidentally, everything on my web is free. All my books, you can copy them, read them, do whatever you like. If it serves the cause of peace, no obligation of any kind. So, how do you explain that? How do you explain that a civilized country like Germany suddenly turns into a country of such horrendous horror, accepted and cheered by the public? And I asked my lead defendant, Dr. Otto Ohlendorf. He was the father of 5 children, very nice looking man, very elegantly dressed in uniform. And he said it was self-defense. What do you mean self-defense? Germany attacks France, Poland, Holland, Hungary, Norway, Sweden. Nobody attacked Germany. Where do you come off with that self-defense? Oh, he said, yes. But we knew. Hitler knew. I was not proxy to all the secret documents, but the head of state, Hitler, he knew better than me, and he told us that Russia is planning to attack us. So in order to prevent that, we had to hit them first. It's called punitive Notstand in Germany, self-defense, or peremptory norm in international law, anticipatory self-defense, explains it. And he said, therefore, we had to do it. It was necessary in our self-defense of our country. The Bolsheviks were coming, and why did you kill all the Jews? Well, everybody knows the Jews were in favor of the Bolsheviks after the First World War, so we have to kill all the Jews. Why do you kill the children? Well, if you eliminated their parents, they would be enemies of Germany, and we were interested in a long-term security of our nation, and therefore it was necessary to also kill the children. And why did you kill the gypsies? Well, nobody can trust the gypsies, everybody knows that. And he presented big legal opinions to that effect. However, what does affect me, and I'm a very patriotic American, because I'm very grateful for the opportunities it gave to me as a poor immigrant boy in the United States. I'm disturbed by the fact that peremptory self-defense is still listed as permissible. And that pains me because I was representing the United States. The title of my trial was United States of America versus Otto Ohlendorf et al., Benjamin Ferencz, Chief Prosecutor. And that argument I did not accept then. I don't accept it today either. Ohlendorf was hanged by the United States for making that argument. I don't like to see it in a quadrennial or any review in which the United States might make similar arguments. But there are some people who don't agree with me. There are some people who agree with Ohlendorf.